How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 340 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is an interesting one, and we're going stateside again. And I'm delighted to be joined by Rhonda Fleming Hayes. And she has a new book out called Garden for Life. And it really caught my eye because the subject of the book is strategies for easier gardening and more joyful gardening as we age. And I think that's something that is going to be relevant for a lot of people, whether it's the listeners of the podcast or maybe parents of the listeners. And especially here in Ireland, we've big gardens and, we tend to have a lot of hedges, a lot of pruning. And then as we get older, are we going to be able, number one, or will we have the desire to continue to do these jobs? So Rhonda's book is brilliant at kind of talking about those things, maybe coming up with little strategies that we can use to make our gardens more enjoyable as we get older. And yeah, there's loads. It's a big book, 220 or 40 pages, a lot of pages anyway, and a lot of great content in it. So, Rhonda, you're very, very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so what initially caught my eye was the subject line of the book, as we said. So strategies for easier greener, more joyful gardening as we age. And here in Ireland, we have a situation where most people have, especially in the rural areas, which a lot of the population lives in, um, big gardens. So typically, we're talking 1 acre, maybe 2 acres, and a lot of hedge and quite a bit of pruning. And yeah, your book is very, very good. You talk about the realities of aging, which a lot of us probably won't ever want to admit to when the time comes. You talk about the benefits of gardening from a health perspective as well, and lots of practical tips, and you've lots of gardener spotlights and so on. So tell us about the book, tell us about the origins of the book, the thought process behind it, and then we'll start chatting through the various strategies that you mentioned.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a garden writer in America, and during my time as a garden writer, I meet so many gardeners with these inspiring gardens, and these gardeners tend to be the ones with really fantastic gardens seem to be in their 60s, their 70s, and
Yeah.
even their 80s. And what I notice about them is that they are they're curious, they're grounded, they're active, and they're open to using their gardens and enjoying their gardens in different ways as they age. But at
Hmm.
this, it's like a lot of them, it seems like they found the fountain of youth, but that's a garden. But at the same time, I'm hearing all these rumblings from my gardening friends, my garden writing friends on the social media. So many people are thinking of downsizing.
Right.
They've built this big, beautiful garden, and then suddenly one day it
It's
becomes
too
too
big.
much.
Yeah, yeah.
And then people have expressed that they felt guilty or they felt overwhelmed. They were just sad at the thought of letting it go. And so I thought, man, there needs to be a book that addresses the challenges and the joys of gardening as we grow older.
Hmm. And yeah, because there's certainly, and I think as you said in your book, as we get older now, people are healthier, more mobile, stronger than maybe in the past. So when you retire, when you're working, excuse me, when you're working and you're um, commuting to work, when you get home, you're bringing kids to matches, you're bringing kids to dancing, you're on the go all the time.
Yeah.
And in those early days of your garden, the garden can at times feel like a chore. But I guess then when you retire from work, the garden can become something very, very enjoyable and something to keep you active and something to give you a bit of a purpose. And then as we transition further on in life, it can get, as you said, a little bit too big, too daunting, too difficult to maintain. And then the thought process comes, can we downsize, or is there ways of maybe gardening smarter as we get older, I guess.
Yeah. We're looking for that sweet spot where you
Hmm.
still are reaping the benefits of gardening, the joyful parts, but then you don't want it to become a chore. And there comes a time when some of those tasks, like pruning hedges, things like that, just becomes too much. And so you don't want to give it up entirely, but you want to aim for the middle somewhere where, it's still keeping you moving and you're still enjoying it. And, I don't know what the number is there in Ireland, but here, the number of people that want to age in place, do you use that term over there?
No, but I guess it means stay in
It's
your
stay in your
home.
home. So we
Yeah,
call it aging in place.
yeah,
Well, they also want to garden in place.
yeah.
So that number is 77% of people over 65 would like to stay in their homes.
Right.
And so that's a big number. And just, there are lots of people over here we have that have suburban gardens.
Hmm.
They're different than your rural gardens. I actually lived in England for a couple of years, so I can picture what your rural gardens look like.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of people here have big suburban gardens with big lawns, things like that, that they, are, they can't decide if they want to leave it. They don't know if they should move to a townhouse or a condo. And if they get in that situation, will that little tiny area, satisfy their need to garden? So it's a lot of people are in a real conundrum. And you can fix a house for aging in place. You can put in grab bars and make sure the rugs don't slip and things like that. But the garden is always moving and growing, and so that's a whole different animal there.
Yeah.
And so I try to include, everybody's got a different garden situation. So I try to include some strategies that are kind of a leaping off point for people to think about either reducing this actual size of the cultivated areas of their gardening or kind of reducing the scope of their gardening while
Hmm.
staying in place. And then I also address, well, if maybe there's enough reasons that you should want to move and, go to a smaller gardening situation.
Yeah. 77% is a big number
That's
of
a big
people.
number.
That's a
Yeah.
big number. And
And it's pretty a reliable number. It's the AARP, which is the Association of Something Retired People over here, which is considered a pretty good source for numbers on senior citizens.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I would imagine, because I don't know that I haven't heard that term being used here, and I certainly haven't heard any surveys on it. But just anecdotally, I would think that most people are in that situation where I would think our percentage is at least similar, if not maybe a bit higher. And for various reasons, we have a lot of bigger gardens here. So your book talks about obviously the realities. It talks about the benefits, but you also get quite practical in the book. So maybe talk about some of the practicalities. And I'm guessing, there is some things that have happened over the last number of years, the likes of robot lawnmowers, which have helped. But like my garden here, when I built the house, I had to have 2 acres. An acre of it is where the house is and gardens. And essentially, there's a lot of lawn, which I've reduced with a wildflower meadow. I'd like to reduce it further. And I
Yeah.
definitely would like to get a robot in time so I don't have to go out and mow because I actually don't enjoy that part of it. But tell us.
I'm curious about the robot mowers because my husband's an engineer and he has our whole house automated. Everything is, you know, you talk to somebody and things happen. But I'm like, that's funny. He's finally relented to the electric mower, but has he thought about the robot one? Maybe it just doesn't fit our small lawn or something, but I'm surprised he hasn't brought that up yet.
Yeah, so over here they've gone very, very popular because for that reason we do have a lot of big lawns and
Yeah.
we've a lot of people who are still working, commuting, and whatnot, and the time for mowing grass is quite small. And also we get a lot of rain. I know before we recorded, I told you we were in the middle of a heat wave, but we get a lot of rain. So if your only time for cutting a lawn is on a Saturday, for example, and every second Saturday in Ireland it rains, you can
That's
see
a
the
lot of
problem.
time.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So that's why
Isn't that
robot.
where the sheep come in?
Yeah, I suppose it's an option for some people, I'm sure. So yeah, but your book mentions very, very practical
Yeah.
solutions. So let's talk about some of the solutions that.
Well, Obviously allowing that everybody's garden is different. I talked about one strategy being that you break your garden a larger garden into zones according to the intensity of cultivation and how much maintenance it needs, and to
Hmm.
try to bring all of your really intensely cultivated areas, your flower beds, your perennial beds, all that, the showier part of your garden, to bring it closer to the house to save you lots of trips, to maybe reduce it in scale, but also so that you can look at, when you're stuck in the house in the rain, you can look out the window and appreciate your efforts.
Yeah.
And then as you go further out, um, you kind of breaking it into zones that need fewer and fewer interventions as you go out, and maybe at the edges of your garden, you're going to let it go wild. I think you guys call it rewilding over there, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
I actually didn't spot that as I flicked through, but you do mention
Yeah.
that in the book as well, do you?
Yeah, because I'm on an urban lot. I have lived on acre lots before, but this one is a quarter of an acre, and we're in a very wooded city. But at the back of my property, I don't really have a conventional American backyard. I just have an area that's just kind of does its own thing back there. There's a lot of native plants. The only person that goes back there is the dog to sniff around and look for rabbits. And so I don't even really bother back there. I tend to concentrate everything up close to the house or out front where it gets, I don't want to say fans or observers, but where, there's that public facing interaction with the garden. So that's where I tend to keep the most intensely planted areas. And
Yeah.
then there are other strategies. It's about, materials and methods and tools. I try to bring everything up now. I go up. So I'm using, my kitchen garden is all raised beds. I'm experimenting with elevated planters, vertical planters, different things like that where I'm not having to bend over and stoop as much. I'm still getting plenty of exercise and enjoyment, but I'm not crawling around on the ground as much now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Vertical gardening is something that, like, it's generally a lot more popular in your part of the world. It doesn't seem to do that well here, but as you get older, vertical gardening, having a vertical planter, I know you guys are you have aquaponics and different things where you have towers
Yeah,
with all your salads
yeah,
in it.
yeah.
Like that's a brilliant, brilliant system, but for some reason it doesn't take off here. But if you can have your herbs and your salads, at workable height, it really makes life a lot easier, and you can
Yeah.
have your fresh produce right close to the house.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many products coming out, and some of the first prototypes of some of these vertical planters, they're quite expensive, but I feel
Yeah,
like as they grow more popular, they're becoming, they're coming down in price. I'm experimenting with one out. I've got it just kind of in a corner of my kitchen garden where I'm growing strawberries, and that's fun. But what I said in the book was that I kind of tried to pretend, what if I only had a patio, or I was, a much older person and I just had a balcony? How could I continue to garden? So these elevated planters and these vertical gardens, sometimes it's a wall garden or a shelf type situation. It's surprising how much you can grow in one of those. You can get 30 plants in this vertical little tower that I'm growing, and it's probably an 18-inch diameter footprint.
yeah,
So you could actually do a couple of those. And I'm doing strawberries, but you could just as well do salads or flowers or something like that.
yeah,
And
herbs
it's
and
so easy to take care of it. You're not bending down at all. And the rabbits don't get it. I don't know how the rabbits do in your country, but they're my prime
uh,
nemesis.
they're a problem in certain areas. Around here, they're not. We've had a big resurgence of foxes in this area, so
Well, okay, good for
we've
you.
we've very little rabbits now. But it's the balance has nearly gone too much towards the foxes now. So, and they don't have predators here,
It's
so
always something, isn't it?
it's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Just in terms of your own raised or your vertical planter, is that hydroponic or are you in soil?
It's in soil, but the top of it has kind of a bowl shape with a spout. And so you water it from the top. And so
Oh,
when
very
I'm
good.
out there watering the rest of my raised beds, I just, put the hose up there and run the hose for a minute until it all trickles back down. It's about 5, 6 feet tall, and waters pretty quickly. We've had a lot of rain so far this season, more than I think usual. So I haven't really had to do anything with it. But yeah, something like that, I think deserves experimenting with. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So you've mentioned some practical things there, reducing the size, maybe breaking up into little zones,
Mm,
and having the workable zones and the showy zones smaller
yeah.
and closer to the house, which makes sense. You also mentioned materials, changing of materials or updating materials. What are you thinking there? I know you mentioned things about footpaths and how you would make them non-slip and various things.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. This goes back to when you're trying to decide, am I going to try to age in place, or do we think we need to downsize, which I like to in the book call right size. That's not as, it doesn't sound as negative. But I urge people to go and give your garden a good look through, evaluate it for safety. Because as we get older, and I am noticing this more and more, our balance it's not as great anymore. We've got
Mhm.
creaky knees, and so we're unsteady when we're going down steps or when we're stepping through paths. So I urge people to go through and really look to see that their paths and their patios, any kind of hard surface, is in good shape so that you don't have any little buckled ridges or uneven places, wobbly stones or something like that, that's going to throw you off or trip you when I go out in my garden and I'm not paying attention sometimes to my feet. I'm looking at my beautiful plants. It's easy to get dazzled and then boom, you trip. And now when we get to our age, I turn 70 next week, a fall can have really life-changing repercussions. You can lose a gardening season, or you can end up, in
Yeah.
worse shape. So those little things. So I encourage people to go around and really study their hardscape for safety and just ease of accessibility so that they
Yeah.
can get out in their garden. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned another couple of things that were good, where and when to look for help. And I guess, if I'm relating it back to the Irish situation, we have as I said, these big hedges and, in terms of meterage, quite a lot of meterage, generally speaking, they're quite high. So there's a lot of work in that. But it makes sense at a certain point to offload that work to a professional. They'll get it done much quicker. Okay, it'll cost you whatever it's going to cost you, but you won't be under pressure doing it, and then you can focus on maybe more enjoyable jobs. Is that kind of the thinking? I know you mentioned
Yeah. Yeah.
arborists and various people that can come in and help you at
Oh, yeah.
various
I think
stages.
it's a matter of safety, but it's also a matter of kind of prioritizing your energy. If you've only got so much energy and, as you're getting older, repetitive injury comes in if you're doing, some type of movement over and over, like pruning that hedge. And so we talk about, you know, when is it time to hire help? And there's that psychological part. And this goes right in with, the aging aspect of the book, which I dealt with also. There's a lot of us, the neighbors and I here, we're all kind of avid gardeners, and we all kind of tease each other about, oh, I see you got so and so helping you today, and one of the other neighbors is like, oh, you have help, it's like, well, yeah. At some point, I have one shout out to Kurt, who helps prune for me. He gets up there on the ladder where I can't anymore. But getting help is not cheating. I used to think it was, and I don't feel bad about it anymore. But the more you can offload the really hard, unsafe, or not unsafe, but unsafe for you type practices, the more you can play with containers and
Yeah, enjoyable
grow
stuff.
vegetables and things like that, and not have to worry about those things, because at some point it goes from being just a task to being a dreaded task.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I guess that's the thing. As I mentioned at the start, when you're at the stage where you're working and driving and commuting and dropping kids and minding
That's
kids.
another time to get help. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a chore. It's a chore at
Yeah.
that stage.
Yeah.
Then at a certain point, it becomes, it becomes a nice chore, or it becomes something that's, nice to do and keeps you mobile and all those things.
Yeah.
And then it reverses again to being a dreaded chore, as you said later on. So if you can out,
I think you're right about that. It kind of comes and goes there, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Certainly here, I know I'm referencing it a bit, but those hedges here are people, people really dread those at various stages, but they're useful then at other stages to
Oh, I
keep you
love the
mobile.
hedges. I remember walking
Yeah,
along the hedges and seeing all the berries and the flowers and the birds.
yeah,
I wish we had them here.
yeah, for sure. You mentioned tools as well in the book. So what have you found any kind of unusual tools? Anything that's I know I go to some garden shows, both in Germany particularly, and there would be a lot of manufacturers from the US and China and various places. And I always find that the US manufacturers are very, very clever with their tools. I'm talking about things like wheelbarrows with handles that twist, so you don't actually have to lift, yeah, through your arms and your back.
Yeah.
The handles twist with it. I've seen them with spades, digging spades with uh, for want of a better word, an extra handle that allows you to dig without bending down and,
Oh, the leverage. Yeah.
yeah, leverage on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it always seems to be the US companies that are a little bit ahead of the curve on this, but over here we never see those tools. They don't seem to sell. So tell us about
Well,
some of
you
the,
should because you're the gardeners.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, they should definitely because they're such clever little devices, but they've never really taken off here. So tell us about some of the ones that you found to be,
Well, I talk about in the book how, sometimes after you reach a certain age, you kind of have these favorite tools and you
hmm
kind of, stick with them. I've got the same dibber I've been using for 20 years. I've got my Felco pruners I've been using for 20 years. And this is me telling myself this as much as my readers, go out and look what's out there now, what's new, because there are all these new tools that maybe you should think about,
yeah.
instead of your old standbys that you tote around in the bucket all the time. I think that I like people to consider using long handled tools whenever possible instead of kneeling down and, like I said, crawling around in the dirt to weed. I think with a tiny diamond point hoe, I can get in there and do the same thing. It's nothing unusual, but it's the long handle. I think a lot of weeding, could be, we can, if we keep on top of it, we can just scrape weeds versus having to get down there and pull those roots out every
hmm
time. Then when it comes to trowels, if you are working down lower or if you're planting, containers are right. A lot of trowels now are ergonomic in the fact that they have a curved handle that puts your hand in a neutral position instead of that lever type
Yeah.
action that we've done before. A lot of them have thumb rests and different they've tweaked it just enough that it makes it so much easier to use. So
Yeah.
looking for tools like that fit your body because everybody's got a different shape hand, and they're tall, they're short, they're whatever. And the length and style of the handle can really change, just that little bit can change something from being a motion that can cause injury to something that really makes gardening easier.
Mm. Yeah, and there's loads of you have to mention a good few little tools there, like the trowel with the extra little handle on it,
Yeah, yeah.
give you more leverage and various things. And I'd hope that they start to come over this way, but so far people don't adopt them over here. You mentioned Felco there; they
Well, we
actually
need to
have.
start a movement.
We need to start a movement, yeah. But there's a brilliant tool in the Felco range with a revolving handle. So I don't know what number Felco you use, but
I think
there's
I have the six because I have big hands. I
yeah.
might have some Dutch ancestry. I'm a big boned girl.
Yeah. But there's one with a revolving handle. So if you're doing repetitive pruning, if you have a lot of rose bushes or a lot of fruit trees or whatever the case would be, and you're constantly squeezing the secateurs, the blade, or not the blade, the handle rotates in your hand. So it
Oh,
completely takes out that and it really is, you know, Now, it's only if you're doing a lot of pruning that you would notice the difference. But if you had a lot
Yeah.
of fruit trees or a lot of rose bushes, to have it rotating in your hand as you're pruning, it really takes the strain out of it. It's an unbelievable how a little small tweak can make such a big
Yeah,
difference.
no, that's really valuable because you can go out with your pruners and like your loppers or whatever and go snip 3 or 4 branches and you're like, oh, that's no big deal. But once you're on the 400th one,
Yeah,
yep, it's a big
yeah,
deal.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Another feature in the book is the gardener spotlight, and there's various gardeners across. I'm assuming different types of gardens, different situations. Is there any that stand out? Is there any that are doing, kind of anything different than what you're talking about, or anything unusual within these gardener spotlights?
Well, a lot of them we have gone through the downsizing process. And in
Okay.
fact, one of them has done it twice. And so that was really good to have that real authentic advice from them about, what problems they ran into, things like that. So I think just from that standpoint, those are worth reading, those
Mhm.
spotlights. One of the people, a fellow master gardener. Do you guys have master gardener programs over there?
No, but there is talk of getting one. We have just had
Yeah,
our first horticultural
yeah.
apprenticeship set up here, so master
Yeah, it's the
gardeners.
same idea,
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah.
Yeah. So one of those is one of my fellow master gardeners, Larry Sapola. He's just a whirlwind of energy, and he's into his 80s now. And I think it's funny to, or if not funny, but interesting to see how people's gardening lives evolve. And when I first met him, 15, 16 years ago, he had this beautiful suburban garden with I think he had 7 decorative ponds. He had a Japanese tea house. He had all these things, and it was just, and he had this massive vegetable gardening because he's Italian and he likes, or Sicilian and he likes to cook. And then when I went to photograph him now, he is really involved in hydroponic gardening now.
All right.
And so his entire back area was just filled with hydroponic experiments, And in the end, it's all about him teaching other people. And he wants to teach people that don't have access to property how to grow their own food. So I thought that
Yeah,
was, that really merits a second look. That's not about downsizing. That's maybe about the changes that happen as you grow older and maybe your style of gardening changes or your goals change.
yeah,
And then I tried to have people from different parts of the country because we obviously have all different kinds of geography, climate, topography. And so I tried to get somebody from California, Arizona, but then the one from Arizona, she went and moved to Florida right after that. So I've gone from watching her grow cactus now watching her grow tropicals. So that's interesting. Who else was in there? People from Ohio, quite a few here from Minnesota that all have a different, take on their gardening. So yeah, it was fun, but I thought it helps to hear from somebody other than just me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You get different, as you say,
yeah,
different
yeah,
types of gardens, different situations, and everybody's situation will be different.
yeah.
Diff
And I garden. I've lived in Minnesota now for 17 years, which is longer than I've lived, well, other than growing up in California. But my husband's job had us moving all over the country and England. And so I've gardened in all these different climates. And so that's kind of informed my gardening experience. And now we spend half the year in down south in New Orleans avoiding the winter here. And so that's a whole new gardening experience. So gardening, it's so different in different places, just completely different joys and problems. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned photography. So, are you a garden photographer as well, or is it general
Um,
photography, or what's?
the way I say it is, I'm not a professional photographer, but I'm a good photographer. I take most of my pictures for my books and my stories. So
Okay, so
probably
mostly
in this
gardening.
book, 95%. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. You had a previous book, Pollinator Friendly Garden. Is that still published? Is
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It's
Yeah,
a different publisher, but it's still available on Amazon and in a few bookstores still. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess that is, as the name suggests, so it's pollinating, you know, plants that are suitable for pollinators and so on. And you mentioned in your space out the back, you have a lot of native plants in the wilder area. So was that just let to go rewild, or did you actually plant native plants in there?
Well, it's funny, my entire garden, because we built this house and I was able for the first time to actually plan a garden instead of adapting to all these other people's gardens.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of had priorities. I'm going to have a certain thing out front. I'm going to have my kitchen garden. I'm going to just let it go wild in the back and have a little pond. Those are my things. But in the back, I planted native plants, but then native plants also showed up.
Okay.
So I planted a serviceberry. I planted a redbud tree. I planted dogwood bushes. Those are all natives.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, Virginia waterleaf shows up, and it's this low-growing, spring blooming plant that has these beautiful lavender blooms and kind of leaves, kind of green with little white splotches. And it just kind of filled in and became a ground cover. And it was like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then out front, the milkweed that is so valuable for monarch butterflies here,
Yeah.
you have other butterfly migrations. It also just kind of showed up. And I just, instead of going, oh, it's a problem, it's real, the common milkweed is, it's not a beautiful plant. It's a little coarse looking, but when it shows up out front, I edit it. I just pull the ones I don't like. I leave the ones that look, that are placed right because nature sometimes knows how to do that.
Yeah.
And so each year it reseeds and then I start the process over. And
Yeah.
there's lots of other plants that show up that I'm like, well, where did that come from? Where did the violets show up from? Oh, they
Yeah.
must have come from the woods down the street,
Yeah.
which
And
is kind of fun.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And you're mixing and matching, and as you say, editing a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Um, in relation to your wild area out the back. So I know here because I've seen it with certain people. As they get older and the garden becomes more difficult, and maybe an area gets away from you or gets a bit untidy, which, as you said, the front of your house is kind of in keeping with everyone else, to a certain
Well,
extent.
not everyone else. You can tell it's my garden.
Yeah. So it has its own
You can
style.
tell, you can see what I'm interested in.
Yeah. So, but it does have a certain look that
There's a
is,
yeah, there's a certain look and a certain flow there. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And but wilder areas they're becoming more acceptable. But how was that? Because I know that, as I say, certain people when they get older, they allow certain areas, or maybe not intentionally, certain areas get away from them and they're not able to keep them tidy, and it becomes a source of frustration to you. But in your garden, it sounds like you have all these native plants. I'm sure there is huge biodiversity. I'm sure there's huge nature building up in there. So, how do you look at that area now? Are you looking at it differently, or was that the intention when you decided to let this go?
Well, it was my intention to not have it was my husband's intention to have a bigger garage so that the backyard wasn't as big. But it was my intention for what was there to not have to be taken care of, really, for it to just kind of be out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do have to go out there and weed occasionally. Like right now, there's a native plant called jewelweed that is growing back there, which is a good pollinator plant, but it tends to be a little too happy back there. And so once again, and it's really easy to pull out. I don't even have to bend over. It gets pretty tall and I just pull those stems out. Sometimes I leave a section of it because it's not totally unattractive. So yeah, it's not that I don't manage it a little bit, but for the most part, it's not something I worry about. And because it's not, we're in a situation where we're, up next to people's fences, I'm not going to worry about it. It's not exposed to anybody. Something like,
Hmm.
I'm not worried about, oh, what are the neighbors going to think?
Yeah.
But, there are more and more gardens in my neighborhood that are incorporated, and they're not just that, what you see maybe in the movies, that flat lawn with two bushes that you see in American housing tracts. More and more people are planting. what I call a plant-rich landscape in their front yards, and there are lots of efforts to plant for pollinators. So my yard is not as unusual as it used to be 10 years ago,
Okay.
but there are still plenty of, tidy lawns.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, as we start to sort of round off, if you were to give people sort of two or three takeaways that they could look at now to as they're aging in their gardens, or if somebody's listening and maybe a parent or a friend is aging in their garden and it is becoming hard, what kind of two or three takeaways would you? Number one is buy the book, but
Thank you. I appreciate that.
uh,
Buy that book.
buy that book. But just a couple of kind of practical kind of guides.
Well, I think the most important thing is I tell people don't stop gardening.
Yeah,
I hear people say, oh, we're going to move to a condo and we won't ever have to do yard work again. And I think, well, there's a difference between tending a garden and yard work. And
yeah,
please at least have a pot of flowers on your front step or something, because I think that connection with nature as you grow older is so important. So I
yeah.
would say stay involved in some type of gardening.
Hmm.
And also maybe, we can't stop time, but we can change our expectations, maybe accept a few imperfections and not be so worried about what the neighbors are going to think, or worried about how does that look. Once you get to a certain age, I say plant what you like and just enjoy what you grow. Don't worry about what people think.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely, and a garden can give purpose as well.
And that's very important.
Yeah,
Purpose, a reason to
yeah,
get up.
yeah, a reason to get up, reason to do something, and yeah, have a bit of pride in it, and all the other benefits of gardening you mentioned in your book as well. So,
Yeah.
um, where can people find the book? So it's Garden for Life: Strategies for Easier, Greener, More Joyful Gardening as We Age. A brilliant, brilliant subject. So where can people
Well,
find the book?
I'm hoping that it's going to be in lots of your local bookstores. It's
Yeah,
on Amazon dot
.co.uk or .ie as well.
UK and
Yeah,
hopefully what's the one for Ireland?
.ie is Ireland. Yeah,
IE, okay.
yeah,
Hopefully there too. It has there's been a couple interviews where that got picked up in the Independent, and I think there's one coming up in the Telegraph. So it
brilliant.
should be becoming better known over there, which
Yeah,
is it really pleases me because um, I have a soft spot for gardening over there.
yeah,
Um, and that time I spent, it wasn't in Ireland, but it was very life-changing.
yeah. And
Those green hedges. Oh wow. Yeah.
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 And it's also a book that I think will be useful because as I say, the the subject and the name of the book caught my eye because it is something that I've noticed here, that
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a need for something like this, to I suppose show people that there's ways that it doesn't have to be a chore, that you can still enjoy your garden and should still enjoy your garden
Yeah,
while
I think the book, obviously it's an American book, but the principles are the same for gardening anywhere. So I think that, there may be a couple plant lists that might not jive with people over there, but for the most part, any of those ideas and strategies can be picked up on gardeners anywhere.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Final question before we close off. You mentioned you have a big birthday next week. I think I have a big one myself in a couple of weeks. So
What number?
uh, 50.
Oh, the
So
big 50.
yeah.
Oh, to be 50 and young again.
So well, you sound young. So have you any plans for the big birthday?
My birthday is July 3rd, which always comes on the July 4th
Yes, big weekend.
celebration.
Yeah,
So, my birthday kind of gets swallowed up in all those fireworks and picnics and everything.
yeah,
So my daughter, who lives in New Orleans, comes up to visit me that week, and that's always the highlight of my
lovely.
birthday.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope you enjoy it anyway, and hope you have a great weekend. It's always, as you
And
say, a
you have a
busy.
good 50 too.
Thank you, thank you. So yeah, it's a really interesting book, and I think a really useful book.
I
And
hope so. Yeah.
yeah, I'll put the link to. I'll find it on Amazon.ie or .com, whichever one it's on, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes anyway. But it's been a really interesting chat. The book sounds brilliant. It sounds like a practical thing that people do need. So, Rhonda, thank you very, very much for coming on Master My Garden podcast.
Well, thank you. You made it so easy and fun.
So that's been this week's episode. Huge thanks to Rhonda for coming on. Yeah, I mentioned at the start, this I think is a really important subject to talk about for us Irish gardeners, particularly. We do have a lot of big gardens. We do have a lot of gardens that, and I think here people do want to stay in their homes. So the options of reducing the size of the gardens really make sense. So I think it's going to be relevant for a lot of people. So if you do have a gardener in your life, or if you are that gardener who's listening and you are thinking of, this garden is needs to be a little bit more manageable as I grow older, then yeah, get yourself a copy of that book. It sounds brilliant. And that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.